Welcome to the Everton Byline here on the Blue Room, here to brighten up your international break. I am Matt Jones, host here at the Blue Room and editor on the Liverpool Echo Sports Desk. And joining me as ever is Paddy Boyland, Everton correspondent for The Athletic. Paddy, how are you?
Good. It's been quite a quiet international break so far, hasn't it? As we were saying off air before we started recording. I always get a bit worried when that happens with Everton. It's like it's quiet, but it's disconcertingly quiet. You're waiting for the big bomb to come out of nowhere, aren't you? And I'm not being a prophet of doom there, by the way, but that's just a habit in this job. Kind of 5 years into this role of The Athletic, you just kind of, when things are quiet, you start to wonder what else is going on.
Yeah, start to feel the worst, definitely. With that in mind, we are going to change the format a little bit on this week's show, as I'm sure people have seen on social media. But just as ever, before we get started, just a reminder that the show now is in partnership with the Bridewell, one of our favourite pubs in Liverpool. Do go down and check it out if you're not already on a match day, before or after. It's always a great place to go and have a drink. Very warm and cosy, certainly at this time of year when the weather is beginning to change. And just a shout out as well, if you're looking for somewhere new to potentially go in town, the Pen Factory is open later this week. Very exciting, from the same people who brought you the Bridewell and the Denby Castle. If you're into that sort of vibe with their sort of boozers, the Pen Factory will definitely be for you. Me and Paddy are going to go down on Thursday and check it out for ourselves, which would be exciting. But yeah, looks like another great venue to add to that stable. So do go and check it out. And just a reminder as well, if you watch us on YouTube, do leave us a rating, do leave us a review. Sorry, that's for listeners. If you're listening to this, do leave us a rating, do leave us a review. If you're watching us on YouTube, do hit like, do hit subscribe. And yeah, if you're here for the first time, do stick around. Welcome to the show. And let us know your thoughts. That's all the admin out of the way, Paddy. Just before we get into the questions that we've had on social media, the big story that we've had over the past 24 hours or so has been tracking the fitness or otherwise of Iliman Ndiaye. I think there were some concerns on Friday night when that video came out from hobbling off against Malawi in Senegal's 4-0 win. The reports from Senegal over the weekend that maybe there was a bit of concern around him, but the Senegal manager today in a press conference has kind of eased those fears a little bit, and it looks like the problem he's had is potentially a minor one, which is obviously very good news.
Yeah, I don't think he's eased my fears yet, Matt, and I'll wait to see how. I'll wait to see, and this is based on no information other than what's out there already, by the way. But I'll wait and see how he gets through Tuesday's game against Malawi for Senegal. Should he play in that? So they've got a double header. First game is in Senegal, second game is in Malawi against the same opponents for qualifying. He set up a goal in that game. I don't know if you saw the assist that he was given, but he basically passed the ball. Nice run inside and passed the ball to it was Lamine Camara, who curled a lovely shot into the goal. It's one of those assists where actually you're giving the assister too much credit.
Like Ashley Young for McNeil's goal against Palace.
Yeah, because I mean, Ashley Young's assist for Iliman Ndiaye's goal against Leicester, I thought was actually pretty good. It was a good pass from deep. And again, to be fair to Young for the Palace, for Dwight McNeil's Palace goal, that was a good interception and pass. But maybe a little bit too much credit. But my fears were slightly allayed when I saw videos of Ndiaye later on Friday night, kind of celebrating with his teammates afterwards. He didn't seem to be. He wasn't on crutches. He wasn't walking gingerly. All the kind of telltale signs that something's as bad as or worse than feared. Did miss kind of per reports in Senegal. He did miss training over the weekend, and even today and yesterday was training individually, I think, ahead of the game against Malawi in Malawi. But the Senegal manager did a press conference on Monday and said that he trained, albeit separately, and for that reason he's at the manager's disposal for the game on Tuesday, and wasn't giving anything away with his team selection, but said he considers him available if needs be. I mean, Everton hat on here. I really hope he doesn't play, and that's not because he's injured and can't, but if he's got a slight knock, even, you want him to sit it out, don't you, and be ready for the game against Ipswich at the weekend. I suppose the positive news is that at the time of recording right now, so at the time of recording on Monday with the show going out on Monday or Tuesday, it doesn't seem to be a particularly bad one. Doesn't seem to be something that would rule them out even of Tuesday's game, never mind Everton's match on Saturday. So that's a positive. It's heart and mouth time whenever an Everton player goes away on international break, particularly one as good as Iliman Ndiaye. I think thinking of the players you wouldn't want to be missing for that game on Saturday, and he'd probably, with Jordan Pickford and Jared Branthwaite, be right up at the top of that list for me, such as has been his early impression. So hopefully he's okay. Hopefully either he plays and he comes through unscathed, or best case scenario of all, he's fine but isn't risked on Tuesday, and we can enjoy watching him again at Portman Road on Saturday after I make the long and what looks at the moment to be slightly daunting trip down and across there on Saturday.
You know what, Paddy? I was waiting for the moan about the trip on Saturday from you, and I thought it might come today or it might come after the game on next Monday's show.
Might got two.
You've got it in early all these days in advance. So bravo to you. Bravo to you.
You can tell I'm looking forward to it. You might still get two moans because we're days out from the game, and then there is a game.
That could be one of the topics next week. Paddy's train travails, but yeah. In all seriousness, it's I mean, they beat Malawi 4-0, was it last week? So come on, lads. You don't need him. You can rest him. I'm sure you can get by without him. Just as an aside, I do think Senegal have got the best nickname in football, the Lions of Teranga. Absolutely brilliant. Love that. It's
one. Cool, isn't it? It's cool. It's certainly a lot better than some of the others. The other very quick point to make on Iliman Ndiaye, of course, is that while he's already a mainstay in the Everton side, for him, every international break at the moment really does feel quite pivotal. He's been in and out of the Senegal teams with different managers, and is trying to cement his place under this current manager, Pape Thiaw. So I think if he has the opportunity to play and is ready to play, then he probably would very much like to, purely so he can try and kind of make sure he's a mainstay from here on in. So yeah, let's see how it goes. They're blessed with, I mean, Idrissa Gueye is part of the midfield, obviously, but they've got Pape Matar Sarr in midfield. Lamine Camara is very talented. And then further forward, blessed. I mean, Sadio Mane is still playing regularly. Nicholas Jackson's there. I think you've got Sarr at Crystal Palace as well, who may well step in should Ndiaye be out. And they've been playing him as a 10, actually, Ndiaye. They played him as a 10 the other night, which is something I'd still love to see consistently at Everton. Don't think it's likely to happen anytime soon, but something I'd love to see at Everton. So still feels important for him. If he can play, I think he probably will try to.
Yeah, which is obviously great for him, and I imagine this will be one of the motivating factors behind him moving to Everton in the summer to get the game time to get in the Senegal team. So nervous for us, but one of the things that's going to come with the territory of this transfer. But yeah, fingers crossed. Maybe watching that game through. Fingers on Tuesday afternoon. But like I said, we asked for questions this week in light of no major topics to get started, and we're going to try and make our way through as many as we can in the next 20 minutes, half an hour or so. So here we go. We'll start off with this one from Danny _EFC6 Paddy, who said, ahead of the summer and it looking like a complete turnover of Everton as a whole, brackets, new stadium, potential new manager, potential new director of football, and an exodus of first team contracts. Is there anyone currently scheduled to leave this next summer that you'd like to see Everton keep hold of, players or staff? Interesting one, and I suppose no one's been confirmed that they're definitely going yet, are they? With that in mind, so it's hard to answer definitively, but I think you wrote about this already this season about how potentially is it 12 first team players could be leaving.
12 first team players contracted into next season.
Yeah, which is remarkable. Obviously, like as Danny himself alludes to, there we've got the situation with Farwell, got the situation with Dyche. And I think we spoke about this briefly before, but from your perspective, what do you think to that? Because there is some key names and some key figures that are they've been part of Dyche's setup, that they look like they could be moving on for free. But on the flip side, if he's not going to be here, or Kevin Fowler's not going to be here, then maybe they're not quite as significant as maybe they would be if those people stayed. It's a really interesting, quite fluid situation, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely fluid, depending on what the new owners want and require from Everton moving forward, what they expect Everton to be, and how that manifests. I suppose if we talk about director of football and manager, you get into systems, you get into recruitment styles of play, all that kind of stuff. Still very early days for all of that. I mean, I've said a few times now that I think the director of football role is just as important in terms of a resolution as the managerial position, purely because they are actually the ones that control basically everything supporting the first team, from analysis to coaching to academy to recruitment, all those kind of things. So I would argue that what happens with Kevin Thelwell and what happens with the director of football remit in general is as important as anything else here. We don't have that resolution yet, and I think that probably will start to glean a little bit more as and when the Friedkins are in situ. What I do know is that quite a lot of prospective buyers that looked at Everton last season were happy with the work that both Thelwell and Dyche were doing. And look, we don't know whether that's changed. That wasn't the Friedkin group necessarily. So they may well have their own thoughts on this. But I know a general view among prospective buyers was that in tough financial circumstances, in tough footballing circumstances, those guys last season were considered to be doing a decent job. Need resolutions there, but I mean, I'm almost borrowing a trick from Sean Dyche here. I've got a pen and paper with me, which is really not great podcast content, but it might be good YouTube content. And I've basically gone through and had to make a list because there's so many names of people that are out of contract, and I've actually gone through and I've gone through with like a tick or cross or a question mark next to, depending on how things play out.
What's your final tally? Without going into specifics, what's your final tally in terms of those players who you'd keep and who you question mark and who you get rid of?
So I started off, before I answer that, I started off on the basic premise that with 12 first-team players contracted next season, some of these players have to be retained, right? Because I don't think you can do complete overhaul of a squad in one window and not expect there to be kind of significant upheaval and churn in terms of results as well. Like I think it can be quite destabilizing, and I think actually what's better is that you do it incrementally in stages. So I actually haven't got a single tick at the moment, but there are loads of question marks.
Okay.
So for example, we need Calvert-Lewin's future to be resolved one way or another, and I'm more concerned that it's resolved than at the actual outcome, if that makes sense, than whether he stays or goes. I mean, if it were me, I would lean towards keeping him if the terms were right, because I think he's still the best striker with the club. We don't know what Brogier's like, really. We don't know how he's recovered. Beto still hasn't shown us anywhere near enough to suggest that he can lead the line in the Premier League. So there'd be a resolution there one way or other. I'd lean towards keeping. But if he is not going to sign, then you need to get your money for him. I'd argue. I've got loads of question marks over the loan players. I mean, you've got Lindstrom, Harrison, Mangala and Brozier there. And as it stands, I'm not entirely sure any of them right now are banging down the door for a contract. Some of the situations are different, aren't they? So you've got, I think Lindstrom's got an option to buy. Brozier's got an option to buy. Harrison hasn't got an option to buy, but you'd think that would be doable with Leeds, in theory, on the right terms.
He's the most likely one to become permanent, doesn't he? As being standard.
Harrison potentially. I mean, that Brozier number is very high at 30. It's not high if he goes on to prove himself at Premier League level, but for now, it's high given where he's been with his injuries and everything else. Like, his first protocol is just start games, isn't it? Get fit, play some games and put a run together and see where that takes him. Lindstrom, not seen enough from him yet to suggest that he's worth the 16 to 18 million-ish option to buy. And Mangala, I think he's been pretty steady, to be honest. But is he going to be worth a high transfer fee in the summer, whatever Leon wants to pay? Well, that kind of remains to be seen. The arrangement with John Textor is not what it was even a couple of months ago, was it? So the terms may well be different. But just going through the others, Matt, we've got Decore, Michael Keane, Idrissa Gueye, João Virginia, Ashley Young, Seamus Coleman, and Asmir Begovic I've got written down. And hopefully I've not missed anybody out there. There's a lot of older players in there that may not even decide to continue. In Young, in Coleman, maybe even in Begovic. Although Begovic's role is more of a support role. He's almost like I would almost see him as like a secondary goalkeeping coach as much as anything. Somebody to train with Pickford and Virginia and so on. Help them with their kind of match readiness. Idrissa Gueye, he'll be 35 by the end of the season. I still think, right now, he's Everton's best central midfielder. And I'd have him in the team week in, week out. I just think in terms of what he does, I think he's the soundest out of possession. He's the most likely to win you the ball back. And I also think he's better than people give him credit for on the ball. João Virginia I'd probably retain as like a decent, competent backup number 2 if the terms are right and he wants to stay. Michael Keane, high wages. He may well look at it and go, this is my chance to get a move and my chance to play regularly somewhere. And I don't think anybody could begrudge him that. But I think financially that's going to be a tough thing to stack up for the club, isn't it? I mean, he is on big money by Everton standards. So he's one that you would probably expect to leave unless he took reduced terms. And Decore, again, there's probably circumstances in which it makes sense to retain him as an option within the squad, but probably the wages would need to be looked at. So I'm sorry, Matt, I've probably not given you too many yeses there.
Yeah, well, do you know what? Like when we think we first realised this, or this was starting to be talked about, I think it was initially seen as, it was before the Freakins came back in, and it felt like it was like a potential not a bad thing where, we've got no money, essentially no new owners, and we've got all this to sort out as well, like a squad which is going to be essentially depleted by players just leaving or us having to sell them. But I imagine new owners coming in might not necessarily see this as like the worst thing in the world, because I think one of the things with Dyche, and I don't want to go too deep into this because we've got other questions to answer. I think one of the concerns I've always had with Dyche is that the longer you keep him for, when the time comes on to move on and try and play a different way, play modern football, which we're going to have to sort of do at some point. The longer you've got Dyche for, the more ingrained his methods are, the more tailored the squad is to his principles, which I think for a new manager coming in, a new director of football coming in, could be difficult to overcome. But when you've got this situation where you've got some key pillars of his side who are going to be moved on. Listen, in an ideal world, Everton would want transfer fees for these players. In the case of some of these players, it's not going to happen, is it? But what it does for Everton, potentially on a better financial footing, potentially for a different director of football, for a different manager, it gives them a chance of a real clean slate and a real, ability to build something completely new without the ties of the previous manager, the previous director of football, which could have been a hindering factor. So I think there are massive positives and negatives to this, but yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how it goes throughout the summer, because there is a lot of work to do from that point of view, even with the takeover looming. Go on, Paddy.
Can I just say that actually, I think one of the really interesting things has been Everton, the ability of Everton's recruitment team to juggle plates and not only try to meet kind of short-term needs with loan signings of older players who might just be able to come in and do a job for a few seasons on relatively low money, with that longer-term view. And some of the signings that they've made, the younger players, they don't feel like signings for Dyche necessarily to me. They feel like signings, versatile signings that could play under a host of different managers. So, for example, Iliman Ndiaye, I think he works in a Sean Dyche team because he is a hard worker and brings a bit of quality in the final third, adds a bit of quality in the final third. But he could play under a much more progressive manager. Tim Rabunum, I think, could play under a much more progressive manager. So I actually think that there's been an element of tailoring short-term players, short-term needs to Dyche, but also then the longer-term recruitment, trying to be a bit more varied and flexible. It is whichever side of the fence you fall on with these players, there's going to be change over the summer probably in a number of different ways, and certainly in the playing squad. And it does give you a bit of extra flexibility. That wage bill will come down again. I mean, if you were to lose, for argument's sake, if you were to lose Calvert-Lewin, Decore, and Michael Keane, they're three of the highest earners in Everton's squad, and you're just kind of wiping them out in one fell swoop.
Well, that's probably about around 300,000 a week off the wage bill, isn't it? In total, you'd imagine, given what they're on. If maybe a little bit less than that, but it's not going to be far off, is it?
I think that's probably a reasonable estimate if I'm doing really rough maths here. So that makes a difference, and that's before you even start. I think the problem for me, and I picked up on this at the end of the summer when I wrote about the 12 players contracted. I think for me that there is a lot to do there, and if you were to lose all of or most of those players that we've mentioned, then it does become quite an uphill task, and that's before we even get on to the bids come in for Jared Branthwaite. Our fringe players, let's say for argument's sake, Beto and a few others, are they wanting to stick around if they're quite clearly not first choice beyond the summer? I think that very quickly you end up getting to the point where I think maybe there's too much to do unless you've got major finance. And that's where the Friedkins are obviously going to come in, because what this is needed and what this still needs is the capital to get it going again. It's been patch-up job after patch-up job for as long as I can remember in terms of window to window. I mean, not just under Kevin Thelwell, by the way. Rafa Benitez spent 1.7 million the summer he was in charge and didn't do a very good job, by the way, in general, but 1.7 million as a Premier League club in that window with kind of big outgoings as well. So lots to do. And I think that's why the sooner this takeover is done, the better, because then you can almost just start going, this is our reality now, this is our new reality, and we can prepare the groundwork for not just January, by the way, but the summer, which is arguably much bigger still.
Yeah. I suppose like a lot of those players could feasibly be offered contracts from abroad, couldn't they? And agree pre-contracts and leave on a free that way. So it could start as early as January, but delved a bit quite deep into that one. I think there's always going to be the one question we're going to look at the most. Let's rattle through some of these last few we've had as well, Paddy. James Priestley has said, it's often said that we, quote, just need to get through the season and get into Brownlee-Moore Dock, end quote, as though that alone will be a panacea for the club and the good times will return. What realistically is going to change? Can't see past the relegation fight. This is him, James saying this. Can't see past the relegation fight, just in a different stadium. Thoughts. I suppose it does, for me, it ties it a little bit back into what we were saying there about how all this change can be a good thing through the prism of Everton being on a much better financial footing. And I think that's what the stadium's, in addition to being a great arena and potentially, fresh starts and all those sorts of things, it's the finances, isn't it? And the revenue and all the sponsorship and everything that comes with it just gives us a better foundation to, one of which is strengthening the team.
Yeah. I mean, there's multiple ways to look at this. I mean, the question uses the word panacea. Now, it's not going to be a panacea in terms of immediately improving Everton's fortunes on the pitch, but what it might do is create stable foundations from which Everton can start to build revenues. And therefore, in this PSR era, and there will be PSR even when it changes to something slightly different, Everton will still be able to grow revenues, to have more spending power in the market in the future. So that's quite clearly a positive. I think for me that the stadium has been kind of the one beacon of hope over the last 12 to, let's say, 36 months, when we've been watching pretty turgid football and witnessing pretty turgid results. It's been the one thing you can point at and go, A, this looks really good, because it does. And B, it's also going to give Everton a fighting chance again, hopefully, of being competitive. And I just mean just being competitive in the Premier League, because that's been a struggle over the last few seasons. I mean, it's hard to estimate the value year on year to Everton financially, because it's not just about the amount of seats you're able to fill and how expensive those seats are and how many corporate seats you sell. There's also a knock-on effect in terms of sponsorships and partnerships, and we've already seen Everton call them founding partners, don't they? You've already got Castor, you've got Christopher Ward, and then there's the supplier. Is it I'm going to get really confused between Amatrack, I think they're called.
Someone out there will correct us if we're wrong, I'm sure. I know what you mean.
I was going to say Amtrak, which I actually think might be the US rail or a US rail provider, but I think it's Amatrack, and they supply the Wanda Metropolitano, among other venues. And they're all founding partners, so they're all already paying Everton for those deals, for the privilege of those deals, and what that exposure at the new stadium will do. I mean, that's positive. It gives them more wiggle room in terms of PSR, which they obviously need. It gives them eases cash flow concerns, all those kind of things, along with the Friedkins hopefully coming in. But there's still going to be a PSR situation in the short term that they're going to have to deal with, and they're still going to have to be clever in the market. So I don't think it can just be a case of anybody coming in and just throwing £300 million at new signings here. Whoever comes in is going to have to be savvy, and that's the challenge ahead. So not a panacea in a footballing sense right now or in the very near future, but potentially a game changer, at least in terms of making Everton more competitive long term, I'd suggest.
Yeah, totally agree, mate. We've had this question as well from Carl Armour, who listens every week. Cheers for getting in touch, mate. He said, root cause analysis behind the justification of recent signings. For example, Beto, how was this decision arrived at? Who approved it? Is it solely our buy now, pay later position in the market? Does said striker have the ability to hold the ball up, etc., etc.? Quite an interesting one that I think, Paddy, and it ties into a little bit of news that's come out over the international break with Everton making a couple of changes to the recruitment setup, again, behind the scenes, and advertising for a first team analyst as well. So things still changing a little bit when it comes to recruitment and analysis. But I think Carl's question ultimately boils down to who's signing off on deals like Beto, which haven't necessarily worked out for the best, have they?
Yeah, I think we'll probably use Beto as a case study then, because the question mentions him. And I think we have to look at the financial parameters. Imagine you're on Football Manager and you're looking to search for a new striker, and your budget actually is zero over the summer. We all know, it's well documented. We reported it exclusively on The Athletic a season or two ago that Everton were doing deals for players, Beto and Chimiti, that summer, where it was buy now, pay later. There was no payment within the first year of the deal. Not every club is going to be amenable to those terms. Far from it. So it immediately shrinks. Imagine your search on Football Manager's just gone from 1,000 strikers to 8 off the top of your head, because most clubs aren't going to do that. I mean, Manchester United came to Everton next summer and said, tell you what, we'll give you nothing for Jared Branthwaite, but 60 million next year. You'd all tell them where to go, wouldn't you? So I think that was kind of out of necessity. What can we get? Who's available? But he was an existing target. He had been scouted. I think they came quite close to signing him under Rafa Benitez. So the recruitment team had identified him long before as a player of interest. Now, he's not shown enough yet, not by my estimation at least. But he did have a track record in Italy of scoring double figures in a pretty low-ranking team, doing well. Was on the fringes. I think he was in a kind of broader, extended Portugal squad. So there was something there. But I think this ultimately boils down to, would Everton have necessarily signed Beto had they had much greater choice? And the answer is probably no. Did they like him anyway? Yes. But was this about the terms? I think obviously yes again. It was obviously the terms had to work for Everton because they had no financial leeway. And that's why. In terms of how it works with sign-off, I mean, there's obviously a recruitment department in place. They have scouts. There's a scout who monitors specifically Spain, Italy, and Portugal. Now, that's changed very recently. It used to be a guy called Nathan Fisher, who was the European scout, but it's seen as a promotion. He's been moved to head of emerging talent 16 to 21-ish age bracket. So think Jared Branthwaite for that. That's trying to find as many new Jared Branthwaites as you can. He's now being replaced. Nathan Fisher is now being replaced in that territory. So Spain, Italy, and Portugal by a guy called Colin Rooney, who used to be Toronto's FC's European scout. And he'll be based out of Madrid and monitoring players in those markets for Everton. And the recruitment department continues to change, and we'll probably tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. What then tends to happen is these players are flagged within the recruitment system and stay on a database. And depending on need, the director of football and the manager and upper echelons of the club might say, we need a striker this summer, so we're going to look specifically at these players. And you basically escalate it up the chain. So you might start with relatively junior scouts looking at the player. But if it's going to develop into significant interest, your head of recruitment, in Everton's case, Dan Purdy, and your director of football, in Everton's case, Kevin Thelwell, would usually look at the player. Now, I don't know for sure that they looked at Beto, but logic would suggest that they would have done. And then they would take a view based on the resources to what Everton are going to do. And then they would send their recommendation upstairs again. It would have been, in the past, it would have been to Fahd Moshiri and Bill Kenwright. With Kenwright having passed away, Moshiri's still there. They still have to send it on to Moshiri. But he's not really as hands-on as we know as he was before, because he's effectively a one-to-way owner. So hopefully that gives people an insight into the process. But the recruitment department continues to change. I mean, I've detailed over the last 12 months how they've hired scouts in Argentina and Brazil, full-time scouts. They've also hired a consultant in Scandinavia, as I wrote last week, a guy called Ole Nielsen, who I believe is working at SK Brann, but used to be at Everton as a Scandinavian scout. So things are changing. They're trying to improve their provision in the emerging talent market, so they're ready to capitalize on any potential increase in resources there. Improve the pipeline to the first team, if you want to call it that, but then also that top tier level of scouting, which is identifying players who can come in and do an immediate job at first team level. So it's interesting. I mean, this ultimately boils down to resource, doesn't it? And they've not had much in the way of resource now for some time, and people can point to raw fees like Beto's or Jake O'Brien's, but a lot of those deals you've had no down payment or very minimal down payment. In Jake O'Brien's case, and it dramatically shrinks the player pool, group of players available to you. I mean, the loads of near misses on people like Morgan Gibbs-White and Brennan Johnson and Mohamed Kudus and Anthony Elanga, people like that. But you've got to have the resources to do it. I don't. One of the things that's always said is that the identification of players is less of an issue at Everton than the actual resource. But I'd love to be able to actually test that theory out and see how they would do with it, extra funds, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd love it if that's how Kevin Fowler did do his scouting, by the way. Just got on the latest Footy Manager and just put the filters on exactly as Everton's are. Footy Manager's not coming out this year, is it? So you might be stuck. You might be stuck going forward, but we'll see. No, really interesting that. We'll do 2 more questions quickly before we wrap up and let people get on with their international break. We've got this from Liz L. Again, Liz, regular listener, really appreciate you getting in touch with me. She has said, how might the new ownership impact the women's team? Believe we are the lowest spenders in the Women's Super League. I've never been sure / always been curious about where the team sits in the overall picture / structure of the club's finances. I'm sure it's all baked in from what I mean. Not an expert on this by any means, Paddy, so I will defer to you, but I'm pretty sure it's all baked into the finances of it, and the takeover will surely only help that side of the football club as well.
Yeah, I mean, just cut and paste with everything we've said on the men's side, and just take it over to the women's as well. They've suffered from the same amount of chronic underinvestment as Liz points out, and ultimately there is a correlation between that investment and results. It's kind of there for all to see. I think one of the most galling things with the Everton women's side is that there was, as on the men's side, there was sustained heavy investment early on in Farhad Moshiri's tenure, but it's tailed off, and they didn't quite get it right initially anyway. And lots of churn, lots of different managers. You'll know this Everton story already before you even hear it. Went for stars, kind of aging stars over young players, then went for very young players and tried to develop, and just kind of lurched from pillar to post almost. The disappointing thing in the last few years has been, as Everton's resources have dried up, the pool of clubs with extra resources has increased. And I mean, Liverpool were in the second tier of English women's domestic football not so long ago, but now they're ahead because they're able to plough resources in. It wasn't so long ago that we were looking around at Liverpool and they had separate resources, they were using separate facilities, and we were thinking, well, Everton look far more enlightened here. Everton are being more progressive. The women are using the same facilities at Finch Farm, all that kind of stuff. We're light years ahead of them. And it's all flipped on its head because of resource. Brighton spending big on top quality players. There's some Aston Villa have gone big, whereas Everton have had to do what they've done on the men's side, which is get by hook or by crook. And one of the very specific problems with the women's team is that they get a lot of injuries. They've had a lot, even so far this season. They've had a lot of serious kind of ACL problems and things like that, which have harmed their chances. So you say this will all be baked in with takeover, and you're right. What's going to need to happen is that the Freakins are going to have to invest in all elements of the club to try and get it back on an even footing and make it competitive. And I hope they do that with the women's team, because there is still great potential there. I mean, going down to Walton Hall Park, it's a great setup. You feel much closer to the action than you ever can do, really, at Goodison. There's much more accessibility. Brian Sorensen's a really interesting head coach, and there's some really likeable players to get behind. Megan Finnegan, Claire Wheeler, players like that. I've really enjoyed, they brought a Japanese midfielder, Hayashi, plays in central midfield. So good technically on the ball, but like a terrier off it, winning back possession. Been a really good signing so far. But they need more of that, particularly in the final third of the pitch where they, again, like the men's team, look a bit blunt. So it needs investment. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Like, the thing that I always used to say, found really great about the women's side of things was that it did feel like we were ahead of the curve when it comes to other teams. Like, Everton did a lot of things right and were first on a lot of stuff. And it wasn't too long ago we were in FA Cup finals frequently, and at that point I've taken a really keen interest in it. But it does just feel like one of those things that's just suffered because of the chronic mismanagement elsewhere in the club. So fingers crossed that can get back. on track as well. And very last question, Paddy. I'm gonna break this question down to little bits, so you can give me one line / one word answers if you want. So this is from Tangled Up in Blues at Toffee Nose 1878. He said, "Give us an insight into what it's like going to Goodison as a journalist." So he goes on to ask a series of mini questions, which I'm going to ask to you now. So the routine. What is your routine, Paddy, in very quickly on a match day?
Yeah, I'm a creature of habit, so I get to the game more or less the same time or same amount of time before kickoff every match. Probably be 2 hours before. Check in, say hello to various colleagues from different outlets. Various people are at each game, and then there's always hot food on, so I'll always make sure to take advantage of that, because that sometimes it ends up being the best part of the day when you're covering Everton. has been at times already this season.
Do you have any rituals or superstitions, or just sit in the same place every week?
Yeah, so it's the same for, I would say, just about every press box regular at Goodison. We all religiously are allocated the same seat every week. So mine is second row from the front of the press box, right on the far right, the very last seat on the right. Got a slight pillar to my right, so I can't actually see the corner kick taker at the park end from one side. But that's not too bad. It could be worse. And it'll be the same with, to be fair, it'll be the same with anyone, whether it's Paul Joyce at the Times. He has his allocated seat for every Everton home game. Joe Thomas at the Liverpool Echo. We all have our designated seats. I quite like that. As I said, I'm a creature of habit. So, I mean, I actually had to move one across because of an issue at the Newcastle game, and that just kind of just knocked me off my stride a little bit for an hour or so while I was getting used to it.
I was going to say, I can't imagine you taking kindly to someone taking your seat. And,
No,
the last, yeah. And the last last part of that question, you sort of, what is the free grub like? What's the Goodison staple when it comes to food?
I mean, it depends. I mean, they obviously have vegetarian provision now, which is good. It tends to be a meat option and a vegetarian option. I would say a Goodison staple would probably be beef with some form of potatoes, whether it's like a potato gratin or boiled or roasted potatoes, and then some veg. So it's okay. I mean, you go to some places, and like I remember Arsenal used to have about 10 cakes out. So I mean, all of a sudden there you're wondering, like, this is a sedentary lifestyle, and if I eat too many of these cakes, I'm going to be in trouble. I'm going to need to hit the gym. Chelsea always puts on a very good spread. Some places, I think United and a few others, have like cured meats and cheeses and stuff as like starter. Oh, wow. Tottenham, same. Absolutely. Tottenham's probably my favourite to go to. Well, one of the things you do notice, obviously, in like Goodison, for all its charms, is an amazing stadium, but you do notice the difference in media provision and media accessibility at Goodison compared to the more modern stadia. I mean, you go to somewhere like Brighton and it's just all so seamless. There's more room. Brentford, the same. Goodison, it's a really tight fit. If everyone's in the press box on match day, then you're actually struggling to use both of your arms to type. At times, I've actually had to start trying typing with one hand because I've not got the room to kind of maneuver around. And then after the game, you've got press conference duties, and some of us will head down as well to what's known as the mix zone, where Everton will bring the player out normally, available for interview, and probably 4, 5, 6 of us, normally most of the local journalists, will ask questions. Trying to think who we've had recently. Tim Irabunam,
Pickford was in there for Newcastle, was he?
James Garner, Jordan Pickford, I think, was after Newcastle.
Yeah,
I didn't go to that one, but I tend to go as much as possible because the mix zone is in the tunnel right next to the home and away dressing rooms. It's a great place to see loads of things that are going on, and the food the players are having taken through to them after the game and all that kind of stuff. All the kind of the little nuggets, like the journalistic nuggets that you'd want, nerdy kind of nuggets. So it tends to be pretty similar. And press conference then after that, normally, as soon as we've done our interview with whichever player comes out to speak to us, we'll go to the press conference room and speak to Sean Dyche. And I think the post-match press conferences obviously tend to go on YouTube, don't they? On Everton's official YouTube. And you can find the post-match stuff, but it's a lot harder to do so. It's not normally broadcast by the club. But they tend to be similar length and similar tone to what comes before. So yeah, hopefully that's answered just about everything.
There you go. Yeah, well, great insight and a ringing endorsement for Everton's potatoes of being all right as well. So
we also get, by the way, at halftime there's a separate media room just by the press box and the main, which used to be the big media room. It's just kind of cut out in the middle of the main stand, and there they'll serve pies and sausage rolls and sometimes like soup that you can have in a cup with. And there's drinks and stuff in there, so it's all right. But like I say, like if all you do is sit down and then eat all the food throughout the day, then you be the size of a house within a few weeks. So you have to be careful.
I'm sure there's people out there who will reflect differently on all your moaning. It sounds like a cushy lifestyle, that. We will wrap it up there because I'm sure there's plenty of that to come next week after your journey to Ipswich on Saturday. If you watch on YouTube, I'm sorry we've sat in the dark. The bulb was gone in this room today, and you can just about see my face. But if you got to this point, do leave us a comment. Do hit like, do hit subscribe. It does help to try and get more and more people onto our YouTube audience. If you're listening, do leave us a rating, do leave us a review, and as we said, do make sure you check out the Bridewell if you're out for a bevy over the weekend, and I'll head down to the Pen Factory as well ahead of what's going to be a great opening weekend for them. But that's it from me and Paddy. We'll be back again next week to reflect on the game against Ipswich and hopefully a big 3 points for the Blues. Up the Toffees, and we'll speak to you then.